Okay, picture this. You're in a meeting, you feel a tiny bit unsure about the point you're trying to make, and suddenly you're talking way too fast. You're throwing in extra words, over explaining, just praying the other person finally gets it. Man, we have all been there, right? It is a completely relatable anxiety. But here's the painful truth. A long message is absolutely not a strong message. True influence, it doesn't come from endless talking. Actually, it comes from the exact opposite. Welcome to this explainer on how to think, speak, and influence like a total pro. Today, we're taking some incredible source material and distilling the true core disciplines of charisma and professional communication. Because as we're going to see, real influence is not about sounding perfectly polished or, being the loudest person in the room. It is all about clear thinking, calm authority, and absolute precision. To get us there, we're going to break this down into a 4-pillar framework. We'll start with the internal, focusing on clarity and structure. Then the external, looking at tone and language. Next up is the environment, where we'll talk about silence and adaptation. And finally, the outcome, driving action and trust. Let's get right into it.
So, pillar 1, the internal, clarity and structure.
Communication actually starts in the silence right before you speak your very first word. Let's say your boss asks for a sudden project update. If you try to organize your thoughts at the exact same time you're saying them out loud, you just end up with a completely scattered mind. It's kind of like trying to work at a ridiculously cluttered desk full of emotional noise and random sticky notes. You're going to ramble, you're going to repeat yourself, but if you just slow down and let your thoughts settle, sort of like letting cloudy waters sit until it becomes crystal clear, your main priority suddenly becomes visible. And honestly, the ultimate test of this, if you cannot express your main point in one single, clean sentence, your mind simply hasn't finished thinking yet. Once you actually have that single, clean sentence, you've got to give it a backbone. A structured message is basically a roadmap. Step 1, you state your point. We need more budget. Step 2, you give support because our software is outdated. Step 3, pause. Literally just let that reality sink in for a second. And then step 4, give direction. Please approve the upgrade by Friday. It's such a simple structure, but it instantly takes a wandering, rambling journey and turns it into purposeful leadership. All right, moving on to pillar 2, the external, tone and language. It's super fascinating to me how often people think authority just means volume or speaking with this really intense, high energy. But intensity without clarity, that just creates pressure. The reality is people instinctively trust and follow the most stable voice in the room. When you take a moment to deepen your breath and lower your tone into a calm, grounded register, you actually absorb the tension around you. You're sending this really powerful subconscious signal that says, I am in control of myself. And guess what? People always respect the communicator who creates that kind of emotional safety. This idea also brilliantly highlights how our actual word choices impact our authority. Words like I guess, maybe, or sort of, they act like these verbal crutches that completely water down your presence. Think of your vocabulary like a carpenter's tool. If you use weak words, it's like trying to cut through wood with a dull saw. The effort is massive and the result is just a mess. But dropping those filler words for strong, decisive phrases, like here's what matters or let's decide, that's like using a razor-sharp blade. It instantly elevates your credibility and cuts right to the heart of the point. Building on that sharp language, we really need to embrace precision and honesty. Being precise tells your listener, hey, I'm not here to waste your time. But here is the ultimate and, maybe slightly terrifying, shortcut to unbreakable trust. Confidently saying, I don't know. I get it. Admitting ignorance in a big meeting feels scary, but it carries enormous weight. It tells everyone that you don't pretend. And that means they can absolutely trust you when you do speak with certainty. Now let's look outward at pillar 3, the environment, silence and adaptation. I want you to really think about this idea for a second. Silence is probably the one tool people fear the most. We tend to rush to fill the empty space with noise because we think silence makes us look unprepared. But just listen to this.
See how that feels? That heavy intentional pause right there proves that silence isn't empty at all. It's actually an active force that gives your words massive, massive gravity.
Plus, silence gives you the time you need to actually read the room, because there is a huge difference between forcing influence and embodying it. Look, if you walk into a room and just blast through a pre-recorded script without paying any attention to the emotional climate, you are forcing it. True influence is much more like surfing. You don't control the wave, right? You read the energy that's already there and you ride it. If the room feels tense, ground your tone. If people are restless, tighten up your message. When you adapt your energy, the audience feels respected, seen, and safe, rather than just pressured.
So, to really read the room and master your delivery, you have to completely reframe how you look at the quiet moments. Pausing before a point builds anticipation. It signals to the listener that something important is coming. And pausing after a point, that allows the meaning to actually sink into their minds. We have to stop fearing the space and start using it as a highlighter for our most critical thoughts. Which brings us to our final pillar, Pillar 4, the outcome, action, and trust. This is where we look at the actual result of your communication. Because let's be real, if your words don't move people to act, you aren't really influencing anyone. You're just making noise. You could share a brilliant idea, get everyone in the room to nod, and then literally nothing happens. A communicator explains information, but an influencer creates momentum. Every single message you deliver has to end with a specific, doable direction. You want to shrink the next step down. So instead of saying something vague like, let's overhaul the system, you say, let's schedule a 15-minute call on Tuesday to pick a vendor. By removing the friction, you safely guide them out of hesitation and directly into action. Now, mastering all of this doesn't require any flashy tricks or gimmicks. It really just comes down to these fundamentals: thinking clearly before you speak, maintaining a calm authority in your tone, using words that carry real weight, structuring your message, using silence as a tool, reading the room and adapting, and finally, speaking to inspire action. True mastery is simply the discipline of repeating these exact basics over and over and over again until they become completely instinctual. When these fundamentals become your natural state, influence just flows out of you effortlessly. So I want to leave you with a bit of a challenge today. The very next time you step into a room, a meeting, or honestly, even just a casual conversation, how will you show up? Are you going to fall back into those old reactive habits of rushing, over-explaining, and filling the silence with weak words? Or will you take a breath, pause, gather your thoughts into one clean sentence, and step into that room with grounded intention? Because ultimately, the way you speak completely shapes the way you move through the world. Every single time you choose clarity over confusion and calm over urgency, you aren't just communicating. You are making the decision to speak, to lead. So what will your next words build?